Hello, and thank you for clicking. I need to preface this by saying that I am not a historian, and I'm working with the information that I have available to me. While I am trying to conduct my due diligence, I am only one man yabbering about outdated vehicles I quite like, and ask that you please take what I say with a grain of salt. With that out of the way, let's get into it. The South African honey badger is a curious case. This small, black and white striped creature is well known for not giving a flying fuck. So much so that hyenas and lions know damn well to stay away from it. The honey badger, or Ratel in Afrikaans, is well known for a few key facts: its daring escapes, insane toughness, and its love for gargling your balls between its gnashing teeth. Likewise, the Ratel series of wheeled IFVs have a similar reputation. Though not quite as small as the animal it is named after, the Ratels have a history of breaking jaws and shoving communist faces into the mud. The Ratel's development started back in the early 1970s, after the BMP-1, the world's first IFV, had taken the stage a few years prior. The South African government, wary of this new threat, conducted wargaming exercises that simulated an invasion into southwest Africa, which brought to attention that the SADF's current arsenal had basically been rendered obsolete in all aspects bar oppression by the Soviet IFV. The UK, in the wake of souring relations after the then decade-old Sharpeville massacre in the Transvaal, which is a story we'll get to at some point, refused to supply the government with new armoured vehicles, a key vehicle in the fleet being the British Elvis Saracens, a 6x6 armoured personnel carrier that looks like a ferret that took excessive amounts of creatine as a hobby. This forced the SAG to turn to France and West Germany, and both countries worked closely with companies like Sandock Austral and Armscor to help set up the first armoured vehicle factory in Boksburg, Gauteng, otherwise known as Johannesburg. The SAG focused their doctrine on a localized bush war rather than a normal conventional war, such as what was being prepared further north in West and East Germany. The borders of South Africa, which included Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia, were vast and often difficult to reach. What would become the Ratel had to be fast off-road and faster on-road, easily repairable, carry troops, and support them when the gloves came off and bullets started flying. The nature of the African land demanded wheels be used, even though Western IFV doctrine cast aside the wheel in favor of the track. Unlike tracks, which are fixed to give consistent ground pressure, wheels can be inflated or deflated at will. Deflating the wheels provides extra ground pressure and expands the surface area around the tire to give better grip. Advances in run-flat technology allowed the Ratels to travel significantly further and did not require flatbed train cars in Angola's limited road and rail network. Wheels could also be patched up or replaced significantly faster after hitting a mine, a nasty rock, or the normal wear and tear of driving deep into the bush. Before we continue, we have to ask why the Saracens had to be replaced. The British Elvis Saracen is a fairly capable APC. It featured 16mm of rolled homogeneous armour, weighed 11 tons, and could carry a total of 2 crew plus 9 troops. It featured a Rolls-Royce B80 Mark IIIA, a petrol-powered engine that drove a 6x6 powertrain supported by independent torsion arms, and achieved a maximum speed of about 70 km an hour on the road and about 30 km an hour in the bush. It had a maximum range of 400 kilometers, though I imagine that this range would be severely reduced when window bashing. A dainty turret perched on top, boasting a Browning 30 caliber M1919 machine gun. During the development of the Elan's replacement, the SADF modified a Saracen into an 8x8 with a Comet turret, boasting a 77mm high-velocity gun from a World War II anti-tank gun. Thank fuck only one of these abominations were built. The biggest problem that the Saracen had at this time was that it was a British make, relying on parts from England, who were not the biggest fans of South Africa. The SAPS, or South African Police Service, used the Saracens as a riot control vehicle. It performed well, but was wholly underclassed by the SADF's requirement for long-range excursions deep into the bush with little to no logistical support. Its maximum range of 400 km and top window bashing speed of about 30 km an hour already rendered the vehicle incompetent in the target environment, and its lack of mine resistance and constant logistical need put excessive pressure into the SADF's already thin supply chain. Added to this, the APC would be next to useless against vehicles, requiring troops to be dropped off from afar and move in on foot, which was impossible to determine pre-contact due to the dense thicket that could trap your rifle, let alone push through. The Ratel series of IFVs were bigger, faster, boasted a larger fuel tank, carried the same number of men, and could engage light to medium armor comfortably. Its spaced wheels, much like a grader, blessed the vehicle with excellent traction, especially when passing through the marsh, sand, and thick foliage. Unfortunately, bottoming out could happen even with the differential locks engaged. The wheels sucked into the sand and mud, and the heavy hulls kept it stuck. This would normally happen to the first few Ratels in a convoy, but thankfully crews had access to onboard e-tools for extraction. After a few passes, the ground would be compact enough to allow for regular traversal. It was designed to excel in all environments it encountered, from thick sand and bog in the summer to desert and rocky plains in the winter. During development, Springfield Bissing, the company in Boksburg, proposed a modified 6x6 truck chassis, with the first prototypes being made ready in 1972. The SADF also reviewed a few other designs, including the Panhard M3, which looks like the kind of problem I'd need a strong laxative to pass through. Thankfully for all of us, what we know as the Ratel was accepted into service in 1976. Manufacture of the IFV started in Durban, specifically at the Sandok Oosterhuis shipyards, where the vehicle hulls were produced. The armor was made to provide all-round protection from Soviet 7.62mm ammunition, and frontal protection from up to 12.7mm ammunition. Comfort was also at the forefront of the design. Considering the vehicle's target environment and lack of graded roads, the Ratels were fitted with independent suspension, supported with coil springs and strong shock absorbers. The driver had a plastic-lined bucket seat, with the gunner and commander on fixed swivel seats and infantry on bench seats able to fit 6 infantrymen, 3 on either side of the bench seat. Infantry would also use their pillows for extra comfort, and to prevent the seats from digging into their asses on long trips. There was ample headspace when seated, about half a meter in total to prevent accidental head knocks, and when standing, men would be hunched slightly. From the factory in Durban, the hulls would then be transported by rail to the Boksburg facility to be assembled with the vehicle's chassis, normally about a day's trip by rail. The Ratel series are powered with a Bissing D32 5.6 6-cylinder liquid-cooled turbodiesel engine that produced 282 horsepower, or about 15.2 horsepower per ton. The engine supplied power to a Renk HSU 106 automechanical transmission, featuring 6 forward gears and 2 reverse. An incredibly reliable transmission that could propel the 18-ton IFV to a maximum safe speed of about 100 km an hour, though it was advised to keep the vehicle between 80 to 90 km an hour for road use, and only about 30 to 40 km an hour when in the bush. The speeds listed are not its top speeds. I've been told that mechanics would regularly remove the governors of the vehicle, allowing the Ratel to achieve speeds of over 140 km an hour, though it would be prone to flipping over, especially with the tug of a wheel at the wrong time. The transfer box had 3 modes, which could be changed with a hydraulic lever by the driver: 2x6 for normal travel, 4x6 for when the vehicle needed extra traction, and 6x6 for where you needed to get where you were going, and fast. It had 480 litres of onboard fuel, enough to keep the Ratel going for about 1,000 km on-road and about 600 km off-road. At first, the Ratel series had been fitted with a 20mm autocannon, originally the Spanish Hispano-Suiza HS-820, but was replaced in production by the French Model F2, produced under license as the Denel GI-2 cannon. It was suitable enough to engage low-flying aircraft, if it ever encountered it, light armor, and enemy personnel. It also had a pintle-mounted machine gun at the rear, added for anti-aircraft use and to provide rear security for the crew. Unlike other vehicles of this time, like the Caspia or Buffel, the Ratel does not feature a full V-shaped undercarriage. Rather, the wheel hubs, and thus the wheels, are designed to blow off after hitting a mine, much like the Yugoslavian TMA-3 fielded by the OPFOR forces, which could damage or destroy the axles and gearbox, but very rarely punch through the hull. The V-shape in the wheel arches dispersed the explosive gases and protected the crew and passengers. Remember, a vehicle can be fixed or replaced, a life cannot. Someone should really tell a certain country that's using modern-day human wave tactics that this is really just not smart. The Ratel featured excellent visual awareness, the aesthetics for its windscreens taken directly from the French Berlier VXB-170 that gave the driver 270 degrees of vision. The bullet-resistant windscreens were also fitted with armored plates that could be raised by the driver from an internal switch when engaged by the enemy. And my favorite part, a flat-pack step stool located at the back left of the vehicle next to all the tools that can be taken off and used as a braai grill for hungry soldiers. Proof that even in the ass end of the bush, a braai was still the best way to get morale up. Like the Eland, the Ratels operate on a war of mobility, unlike Western IFVs at the time, which relegated the IFV's role to supporting the movement of tanks. South Africa's doctrine is centered around rapid movement, striking from the flanks, and confusing the enemy with continuous movements that emphasize concentrated fire in a tactic known as fire belt action. This doctrine was well suited for the wide plains and wooded expanses of southern Angola that allowed the South Africans to carry out evasive maneuvers and strike quickly from unexpected directions without being prematurely detected. This tactic depended on the Ratel's speed and mobility, which were used to maximum effect to compensate for its relatively light armor. While carrying out an attack, Ratels interspersed into arrowhead-shaped formations. The command Ratels located at the back, with a platoon of Ratel 20s and a troop of Ratel 90s located on each flank forward of the command Ratels. Ratel 81s, if present, occupied a space in the center of the formation, directly in front of the command Ratels. The new Ratel 20s fought in the fires of war in Operation Reindeer against the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, or PLAN, original, I know. The SADF experimented with these new mechanized squadrons by incorporating the Eland series of armored cars. Unfortunately, complications and delays quickly arose, as the Elands struggled to keep pace with the Ratels and often got stuck in either the sand or mud or even the foliage, requiring them to be towed out. This also proved to be a logistical nightmare, as both petrol and diesel had to be ferried down the tail end of the convoys, petrol for the Elands and diesel for the Ratels. A fantastic target of opportunity if you want to cause massive delays by blowing up a tanker or two. The use of the Elands was deemed crucial by SADF command, since PLAN, while unable to stand on its own in conventional warfare, had the backing of Cuba and the Angolan armed forces, which could field tanks and build formidable fortifications. The Eland 60s were able to lob shells over these fortifications, and the Eland 90s could destroy defensive hardpoints and enemy armor. The use was deemed crucial, as the Ratel 20 cannons were unable to effectively destroy these threats. However, it became clear that this hybrid mix of vehicles wouldn't work in the long run, as the Elands were too fragile and the mere thought of the logistics required would give any commander a fucking awful migraine. Then some bright spark had a wonderful idea. Why not take the existing armaments of the Elands and just stick it on the Ratels? Well, this turned out to be a brilliant idea, and the Ratels were soon modified and manufactured to fit AML turrets boasting both K1 60mm mortars that could fire high explosive shells, illumination rounds, and colored markers, and the Denel GT2 90mm cannons, which had high explosive and either a heat T or a tungsten core APDS, or armor-piercing saber round. The APDS is one of the reasons why there are so many stories of Ratel 90s struggling against medium and main battle tanks. On that note, there were other variants available as well, such as the Command Ratel, a mobile command post featuring a 12.7mm MG4CA machine gun, additional radio equipment, a public address system, map tables, and it was also fitted with reclining seats and air conditioning, which, if you've ever been to Africa, you know how hot and humid it gets, as well as the incessant assault by flies and mosquitoes. The Ratel 81, which lacked a turret, but housed an 81mm M3 smoothbore mortar on a turntable in the passenger compartment, giving it 360 degrees of lateral traversal. If necessary, the mortar can be taken out and used conventionally with a base plate and bipod. The Ratel 81 carried 148 rounds of high explosive and smoke munitions, with a maximum range of 4.85 kilometers. The Ratel ZT3, which featured a bank of 3 missiles in a launcher system mounted atop, loaded with swift, wire-guided anti-tank missiles that came in 2 types: the tandem heat warhead for tanks, and a multi-purpose penetrator designed for hard targets like bunkers. These wire-guided missiles had a nasty habit of fucking off into the distance, completely missing the target and leaving crews exposed if they didn't footsake from their current position lest they be left in the cuck. The Ratel AA, sold to the Jordanian army, who modified it with two 23mm machine guns stripped off of a BTR-94. I've seen these referred to as the Ratel 23-2, but more often as the Ratel with 23mm cannons. These AA variants have also been exported to countries like Rwanda. And finally, a spin-off variant of Ratel, the Belgian Simbus amphibious fighting vehicle, a vehicle that we'll touch on another time. Infantry commonly fought alongside these vehicles, and these brave men came in several disciplines. I'm simplifying them for the video's sake, but we will go in depth with these guys another time. Bokops, who I've since learned their nickname was derived from their shoulder patch, a springbok's head, were conscripted infantry mainly acting as patrol and quick reaction forces. These guys would have been fitted with the R1, an FN-FAL modified for African use, a French ALRAC F1 shoulder-fired anti-tank system, and the FN MAG medium machine gun, supplied with 75-round pouch magazines. Mechanized infantry of the 61 and 62nd Battalion, who were equipped with R4s, Denel FTS shoulder-fired rocket launcher systems, and either the FN MAG or later the Denel SS-77 medium machine gun. These guys saw the brunt of the fighting and would take the hardest punches. When it came to insertion, troops often would not wear their harnesses. This was so that they could dismount faster when going into combat. A byproduct of this being all the nasty bumps on their heads from crashing into the roof. No wonder these Afrikaners are mad and built a fierce reputation. All they wanted was a beer and a smoke for their nasty headache. Plan and the Angolan military had a nasty habit of making fortifications below the ground, like trenches and bunkers to ambush SADF infantry units. As a result of this, Ratels often accidentally drove into these wide trenches while navigating the bush and rendered themselves stuck. It was also common for such camps to field Soviet 14.7mm and ZU 23-2 20mm anti-aircraft guns that could be used for anti-vehicle and anti-infantry purposes. These proved deadly to Ratels, with engineers operating frantically with wire ropes and e-tools in a desperate attempt to unstick the Ratels and save the crew. In February 1988, a Ratel IFV participating in Operation Hooper against the elements of the 59th Fapler Brigade was hit by one of these anti-aircraft guns, to which a mechanic told me a story handed down orally.
The Ratel IFV was hit on the left-hand side and knocked out by a Soviet anti-aircraft gun deployed in the ground attack role. After the battle on the right-hand side, a large hole was ripped out of the vehicle and internal debris fell out as soon as we opened the door. The privates we sent in to clean up afterwards were never quite the same again.
During Operation Protea and Operation Askari, Ratel 90s faced off against Angolan PT-76 light tanks, T-34-85 medium tanks, and T-54 and T-55 main battle tanks. The 90mm proved adequate in taking on the lighter armor of the PT-76s, but struggled against the T-54 and T-55's armor. Crews were trained to counter medium and main battle tanks, the gunners doing their damnedest to engage the turret ring or the vulnerable side armor. And should the tank turret move, they just continue driving and another Ratel 90 would take its place. This, as well as the mediocre ranges that could be engaged from and the lack of the stabilized gun and inferior fire controls, found the Ratels outclassed in conventional one-on-one engagements, the only blessing being the Ratels' better vision ports, and the fact that Fapler armored divisions were trained to fight buttoned up and lacking critical situational awareness. These unfair engagements were not the fault of command or the lack of development, but simply due to the embargo set against the country. The SADF couldn't get better guns because they didn't have better guns, and fuck me if they were going to use this affront to God. A common tactic from the Angolan tankers was to prioritize mobility kills. Gunners would fire around underneath the vehicle to destroy the axles and gearboxes, leaving it dead in the water and an easy hard kill for the other tanks. Not only this, but enemy infantry quickly learned that shooting an RPG into the crew cab could set off secondary explosions inside the vehicle, detonating shells and engulfing the Ratels and their crews in a fiery demise. This breach of the SAC doctrine, which was to fight tanks with other tanks, forced SADF Command to develop the ZT-3 anti-tank guided missile launcher system, which saw limited combat against T-55s during Operation Excite and Operation Hilti. The early 1980s was hard on the economy, even more so on the defense contractors like Denel and Sank Austral. In an unsurprising twist, these contractors sought external buyers for their product, and Ratel information became readily available through marketing. Morocco was one of the first countries to show interest for their own conflicts in the Western Sahara. By this time, Panhard's AML series production lines were closing, and Panhard referenced Morocco to South Africa's Eland series, a much better suited vehicle to the harsh climates of Africa. See my Eland video for more details. Sank Austral were all too happy to supply Elands and several dozen Ratel series for use in counterinsurgency operations. However, exports were handicapped thanks to the United Nations Resolution 558 in 1984, which prohibited its member states from buying weapons and vehicles from South Africa, only lifting the ban in the early 2000s. The Royal Jordanian Army bought a set of 100 Ratels in 2002 and another 200 in 2004. They modified the IFVs with an engine refit and replaced a 20mm cannon with a BAU-23 turret carrying the Ukrainian 23mm cannons. These modified Ratels were then sold on to countries like Yemen, who used the Ratel for reconnaissance missions and participated during the Yemeni Revolution of 2011. Interestingly, SANDF still feels the Ratel series as part of its peacekeeping corps within the DRC today. However, it's not clear what effect the Ratel series has on its mission, as SANDF's maintenance structure is still not well maintained or indeed effective as it used to be. After the Angolan War ended in 1989 and the subsequent merger into the new designation SANDF, or South African National Defence Force, in 1995, resulted in regular budget cuts in defence spending, leading to cutting jobs and retrenching equipment. 350 of the Ratels being declared surplus and sold off in the mid-2000s. The remaining Ratel series were hindered by restricted maintenance spending and lack of trained personnel, as well as the development of the Ratel series' replacement with the Finnish 8x8 infantry fighting vehicle, the Partia AMV, to be renamed the Badger, which is also a multi-role vehicle, able to switch out its turret to combat different threats, much like the Ratel originally did. The Partia AMV was scheduled to be adopted into military service in 2024. However, budget constraints have left the Badger in a bit of a dead end. Instead, OTT Solutions unveiled their Ratel Service Life Extension Program, or SLEP. I'm gonna call it SLUP, like slub chips. Fucking love me some slub chips, holy shit. Anyway, the SLUP aims to upgrade the IFV to continue service for at least another 30 years, by upgrading the optics with the day camera, thermal imager, and laser rangefinder developed by Vision 24 Technologies. The engine and transmission are to be replaced with a Cummins ISB 6.7, a 360 horsepower turbodiesel engine that'll power an Allison SP 3000 6-speed automatic gearbox that could propel the vehicle up to a maximum governed, and I'll say this again, governed speed of 110 km per hour, up to a maximum range of 1,250 kilometers. The Ratel series fought hard and fought well, limited by its shared weaponry with the Eland series and its associated disadvantages. The Ratel series of IFVs showed the world that wheels were still a major player in modern warfare and could take on the best tanks fielded against it. It paved the way for vehicle development like the Partia AMV, and even though the Ratel is old and wildly outdated by modern standards, it still squares its shoulders and dishes out punishment. This IFV fucked hard back in the day, and like the honey badger it is named after, still punches well above its weight class today. Well, thank you for staying until the end of the video. I do hope you enjoyed. I know I said that I'd get this video out by the end of April, but things got out in the way and it's been a bit of a commerce. And given the fact that this video is already 26 fucking minutes, which is way longer than the Eland video ever was, it unfortunately required more work. I do have another video planned. It's gonna be a very big one, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of information. I am going to try and get a couple more videos, maybe in the 5 or 10 minute mark, up to keep the channel active, so you will still see more of me here and there. So thank you again for watching. I do appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.